All eyes once again on Capitol Hill today with the nation's top infectious disease expert giving an update about where we stand in this pandemic. Yes, there was another hearing about this, with Democrats and Republicans taking shots at each other's approach. However, House Minority Whip Steve Scalise is wondering when a hearing will be scheduled about the origins of all of this.
Going from a virus that no one even knew about just 6 months ago, China lied about during that period, where we could have learned a lot more, where we could have saved more lives while China was lying. I wish we would have hearings on that, because that is a real fact. That's not a political talking point. We all know not only did China lie, they corrupted the World Health Organization, and they were perpetuating that as well. It made it harder for us. I remember being in a meeting at the White House with Dr. Fauci months ago, before it was a global pandemic, and we were talking about the desire to get some of our medical experts into China to find out what was really going on, and they wouldn't let you in.
As you just saw, Dr. Anthony Fauci appearing alongside CDC Director Robert Redfield and an official from the Department of Health and Human Services. Dr. Fauci telling Congress that the steps President Trump took early on in this pandemic saved lives, such as banning travel from China and later from Europe, something we showed you earlier before. However, when it comes to the effectiveness of lockdowns, Dr. Fauci appearing to take a swipe at the differing responses at the state and local levels.
When you look at the comparison between Asia and Europe, as is shown by the chairman's poster up there, that when they shut down to the tune of about 95%, getting their baseline down to tens or hundreds of cases per day. So whereas when we did it, we got it down, but unfortunately our baseline was 20,000 a day. I think there was such a diversity of response in this country from different states that we really did not have a unified bringing everything down.
Back in March, Dr. Fauci was calling for a nationwide lockdown and a national face mask mandate, despite the constitutional issues at hand. However, earlier this week, Dr. Fauci saying that despite the growing number of cases, he does not think a second round of lockdowns will be necessary in the coming months. But he is recommending that people start wearing goggles or face shields, if they have them, as an extra layer of protection for the eyes, which could act as an entry point for this virus. With yet another factor thrown into the mix, many are wondering when this will all be over. Once again, we go to Dr. Fauci, who believes a vaccine may be ready by the end of this year.
I know to some people this seems like it is so fast that there might be compromising of safety and in scientific integrity, and I can tell you that is absolutely not the case. The rapidity with which we're doing it is as a result of very different technologies. There's never a guarantee that you're going to get a safe and effective vaccine. But from everything we've seen now in the animal data as well as the early human data, we feel cautiously optimistic that we will have a vaccine by the end of this year and as we go into 2021. So I don't think it's dreaming, Congresswoman. I believe it's a reality and will be shown to be a reality.
However, things getting contentious later on in that hearing when Congressman Jim Jordan was given the floor to speak. So here to help me break down this heated debate by adding her own conservative commentary is After Hours producer Kara McKinney. Kara, take it away.
Thank you, Alex. Something I like to say a lot is if your blood isn't boiling, then you're not paying attention to politics. I don't know about you, but my blood pressure goes through the roof every time I see Dr. Fauci. This is a guy who is at the tip of the spear when it comes to our response to coronavirus, which is kind of terrible because he has a lot to gain by dragging this thing out for as long as possible in order to keep his phone ringing with offers to appear on magazines or to throw out first pitches or to have Brad Pitt play him on SNL. He needs to make this pandemic seem like the worst thing in history. That way he's the hero. But finally, someone hit him with the tough questions, and I love to see it.
Dr. Fauci, do protests increase the spread of the virus?
Do protests increase the spread of the virus? I think I can make a general statement.
Well, 500,000 protesters on June 6th alone.
Yeah.
I'm just asking that number of people, does it increase the spread of the virus?
Crowding together, particularly when you're not wearing a mask, contributes to the spread of the virus.
Should we limit the protesting?
I'm not sure what you mean. How do we say limit the protesting?
Should government limit the protesting?
How do we do that? Well, I don't know. Maybe the same way your so-called medical guidance has been destroying the lives of law-abiding business owners. That's a start. So now you may be arguing that running a business during a pandemic isn't necessarily a constitutional right in the same way that protesting is. Fair enough. So then why can't I freely exercise my First Amendment right to practice my religion in any way that I want? The fact that restaurants and malls can operate so much more freely than my church makes me concerned that leftists are trying to condition Americans into thinking that religion is non-essential. They'll say, look how many months you went without going to church. It wasn't that bad.
Government stopping people from going to church, Dr. Fauci?
Yeah.
Last week in the Calvary Chapel case, 5 liberals on the Supreme Court said it was okay for Nevada to limit church services. Justice Gorsuch said it best. He said there's no world in which the Constitution permits Nevada to favor Caesar's Palace over Calvary Chapel. I'm just asking, is there a world where the Constitution says you can favor one First Amendment liberty, protesting, over another, practicing your faith?
I'm not favoring anybody over anybody. I'm just making a statement that's a broad statement that avoid crowds of any type, no matter where you are.
So in my opinion, protests are actually the biggest plot hole in this whole coronavirus narrative. Dr. Fauci himself says Black Americans are, quote, disproportionately affected by this disease. And yet he can't muster even the slightest bit of outrage about the Black Lives Matter movement openly flouting his health recommendations. I mean, take a look at this clip from Brooklyn just last month, where thousands gathered in support of this Black transgender community, shoulder to shoulder, no social distancing. So either the entire medical community is secretly supporting a strange form of genocide or something, or they know they're overhyping this thing. Don't get me wrong, this virus can be very dangerous for those who are 65 and older with underlying health conditions. But for people under the age of 45, the risk of death is basically non-existent. And studies are now showing that young people and asymptomatic people are not super spreaders either. One rule I like to follow is to look at how someone is living before taking advice from them. For example, when Al Gore bought a multi-million-dollar beachfront mansion, it's kind of hard to believe him when he says that climate change is going to cause the oceans to rise and kill us all. So same thing with Congressman Jerry Nadler. If he doesn't think face masks are important enough for him to wear on his own time, then I don't think I need one either. Here he is earlier this week without a mask in D.C. and frankly without a clue when it comes to the dangers of Antifa as well.
It is true. There's violence across the whole country. Do you disavow the violence from Antifa? That's happening in Portland right now? There's riots.
That's a myth that's being spread only in Washington, D.C.
About Antifa in Portland?
Yes.
Sir, there's videos everywhere online. There's fires and riots. They're throwing fireworks at federal officers. DHS is there. Look online. It gets crazy, Mr. Nadler.
Wow, so he thinks it's fake news.
Antifa's a myth.
Yeah, Antifa's a myth in Portland. Meanwhile, the whole city is on fire, and they're trying to burn down the courthouse. But
as I'm sure you all know, Congressman Nadler uses every moment he can to snap at his Republican colleagues to put their face mask back on. That's how you know this thing is political, and don't even get me started on the controversies surrounding hydroxychloroquine. As far as I'm aware, Dr. Fauci isn't personally treating any patients for coronavirus in some type of clinic down the street. And yet there are doctors like those we've had on After Hours and the ones who spoke at the White Coat Summit in D.C. who are actually on the ground with patients day in and day out and are seeing success with this drug. But despite this, Dr. Fauci isn't budging.
So that study is a flawed study, and I think anyone who examines it carefully is that it is not a randomized placebo-controlled trial.
It said it was peer-reviewed.
It doesn't matter. You can peer review something that's a bad study, but the fact is it is not a randomized placebo-controlled trial. The point that I think is important, because we all want to keep an open mind, any and all of the randomized placebo-controlled trials, which is the gold standard of determining if something is effective, none of them had shown any efficacy for hydroxychloroquine.
I haven't heard of a massive wave of COVID deaths associated with this drug specifically, which has been used safely for decades for other purposes. So what's really the harm? If a patient wants the drug and their doctor wants to prescribe it, that's called an A and B conversation, and naysayers like Fauci can see their way out of it. But let's all take a breath because we're going to get through this pandemic together. In fact, this isn't even the worst one we've seen since 1918. Everyone forgets that the 1957 and the 1968 flu pandemics each killed over 100,000 Americans. Since the U.S. population was much smaller back then, that is the equivalent of around 250,000 Americans dying today of COVID. The sad part, in my opinion, in all of this is that we knew from the beginning that this virus almost exclusively targets the elderly and those who have underlying conditions. Yet we focus so much time on patrolling beaches and bars and parks that we ignore nursing homes. Because in many ways, young people in their selfishness hijacked this pandemic and made it all about them and their fears. And now close to 50% of all coronavirus deaths are coming from nursing homes and similar senior care facilities. We failed our elders, and now we're failing our youth as well. The CDC director saying young people need to go back to school because these lockdowns are killing more of them than the virus is.
But there has been another cost that we've seen, particularly in high schools. We're seeing, sadly, far greater suicides now than we are deaths from COVID. We're seeing far greater deaths from drug overdose that are above excess that we had as background than we are seeing deaths from COVID.
So hopefully there was something there for you to think about tonight, but that's enough from me. Back to you, Alex.
Kara, I know a lot of people are expressing the very same things that you're talking about right now. I mean, we hear from our viewers all the time. It's not so much just a one-sided argument, and I think you did an awesome job portraying that other side of the argument. Kara McKinney, producer here on After Hours, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
And still ahead, it's hard to keep track with what's happening in the news cycle with the global pandemic, major hearings on Capitol Hill, and protests continuing in major U.S. cities. So we'll revisit the top headlines from the week when we come back.